We are joined by Dr. Mark Caleb Smith. He is the Dean of the School of Arts and Humanities and Professor of Political Science at Cedarville. And as Daria just called him, our political czar. So
you have too many titles.
It's true.
That's a pretty big business card.
That would be so fun. You could just change your business card, political czar, and just throw it around at places.
I like it. I've always wanted to be a czar.
So now you are.
I will embrace this title. Thank you.
You're a czar for us. So, Dr. Smith, tariffs, okay? It's all we've been hearing about for, I don't know, it feels like 100 years. And it's like they're on, they're off, they're paused for 30 days, they're paused for now 90 days. We're just doing it to these people, but not these, and now we're doing it to everybody. What's going on? What's going on with tariffs?
If I tell you something right now, by the time our segment ends, it might be different. So
it's
whatever
so true.
I say, we'll have to take into account that things have changed pretty quickly. So yeah, it's sort of like Punxsutawney Phil, right? I mean, is he going to see his shadow or not? Are we going to have tariffs today or tomorrow? I really don't know. Right now, where we are is there's a 10% global tariff on everything coming into the United States. And we also have a tariff on everything, a higher tariff on Chinese goods. Mm-hmm. I want to say, what is that, like 184% or something like that? 125%, I think, effective immediately. Still a tariff on autos coming in from out of the country. Besides that, everything else is sort of at this baseline of 10% for the moment. And so, as you all know, I mean, yesterday, President Trump decided to pull back on the other tariffs that were in place. But this 10% is still a pretty significant shift.
So we're keeping the 10% global, but all the other ones that were about to take place are no longer taking place for now.
That's right. They've been paused. President Trump says so that he can negotiate with other countries. I think it's also obviously because the markets were just melting down. The S&P had lost 12% over the past week. And for those, I have tried, studiously not to look at my 401k.
Yeah, me too.
During the last
it's
week.
Really hard.
And hopefully the rest of you have not looked at yours either. And so President Trump, I think, pays attention to the markets, and he also got an awful lot of pressure from what I've been reading yesterday from Republican lawmakers, from foreign leaders, and other people who really tried to argue with him that this was a bad path to go down. And so for now, he's pulled back at least some of the more excessive tariffs. But again, I don't think we should minimize this 10% global tariff on incoming goods is a significant tariff all by itself.
So if we're to kind of backtrack a little bit, let's start with what even is a tariff for those who maybe I'm hearing all about them, but I have no idea what this means.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a tariff is basically a tax. I think it's the easiest way to think of it is as a tax on a good coming into the United States of America. And I think there's this misconception that tax or that cost is paid by the foreign government that the good comes from, but it's really paid by the company or the person who's importing the good into the United States. So I'm not an expert in tariffs, thankfully, but for example, for simplicity's sake, let's think of Walmart as an American company that sells an awful lot of imported goods from places across the world. If there's a 10% tariff on those, Walmart, as the importer of those goods, would have to pay an additional 10% to whatever they've already agreed to pay for the product that's coming overseas. And so if Walmart's buying T-shirts from Vietnam and it costs $100,000, you have to add 10% to that now. So it's $110,000 they will have to pay for that, the 10% going to the tariff, the $100,000 for the good itself. And so because of that, I think you can expect to see almost an automatic 10% hike on goods that are coming in from outside of the country. So these importers, I think we have this conception that these businesses just have piles of money sitting around. Some of them do, but many of these businesses really run a pretty tight and efficient approach, and they've sort of had this expectation. Here's what I'm going to pay. Here's what I can sell it for. Well, now my cost just went up 10%. I've got to shift those costs somewhere. I can't just eat all those costs. And most of them are going to go to the consumers who are actually going to buy the good. And so now your $10 T-shirt from Walmart might cost $11, but that would be true also for obviously everything else that we could be importing.
And now politically, what is the goal or purpose of using a tariff?
Well, this is where I think President Trump has been, and the White House, I should say, has sort of been all over the place when they talk about their goals. And I guess you could have multiple goals attached to it, and so it's a little bit of a moving target, though. At one level, they say we're going to use tariffs to raise money, and so we're going to take this money that's paid by these importers, and we're going to apply it to the national debt. We're going to have more revenue. You could argue that maybe we're going to impose these tariffs to encourage more businesses to locate to the United States. Mm-hmm. And so if we make it so expensive to import those T-shirts from Vietnam, then maybe those factories, maybe people will have an incentive to build factories in the United States to make T-shirts so that then we can sell them domestically instead of relying on Vietnam to produce them. So that's one motivation. Another one that President Trump has claimed is that it's really an emergency that's causing him to do this, particularly over fentanyl coming into the United States. Mm-hmm. He says tariffs are going to be one way that we can deal with the fentanyl problem. We can talk about all these motivations to whatever degree you want. I think that's probably a harder justification in some ways. And so I think in the best case scenario, President Trump wants to lower the tariffs of other countries on our goods, where he says, okay, I want you to lower your rates of whatever you're charging on our stuff, and this is just a way to negotiate through that process.
And I think that's been, from what I've seen, a big point of this is we've been being charged tariffs for a long time at a much higher rate. And so this feels like maybe we're kind of evening out the playing field. Is that true?
I think that's probably true in some cases, but I think it's also clearly not true in others. And so I think one of the things that makes this really difficult to talk about is the global approach that the administration has taken, even by putting tariffs on countries that have no tariffs on our products. So, yesterday, the president of Switzerland called President Trump, and she was trying to argue with him that we've eliminated our tariffs on all incoming U.S. goods. We did that a while ago. Why would we have this additional expense put on our goods going into your country? You're one of our biggest markets. You're going to devastate some industries within Switzerland. And so I think there's some justification maybe in some countries' cases that we want to lower their tariffs to make our goods more competitive. But it's also true in a lot of these other instances that it just doesn't quite apply. I think, and we can talk more about this, but I think what really seems to be driving President Trump is he has this idea that a trade deficit between countries means that we're getting ripped off. That's how he kind of puts it. Mm-hmm. And this using tariffs is a way to deal with the trade deficit. In his mind, this is the best tool to do that.
We are talking with Dr. Mark Caleb Smith about tariffs. Ooh, spooky, but not really. You're helping us figure it out. So I'd like to talk more about how have past administrations used, not used tariffs, because it feels really big right now, but I'm sure this is not the first time. So I want to talk about what's happened in the past.
Yeah, I mean, tariffs have been around in America since we've had a country. We've always had sort of a policy with how to deal with goods being brought into the country. And it's also true that through much of our history, things like tariffs and excise taxes and other sorts of things really funded the federal government. And sometimes President Trump talks about how tariffs raised so much revenue like in the 19th century, and he wants to go back to that model. And I think there's some element of truth to that. A couple of things to note, though. The Constitution gives Congress the power to do this, and so Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Congress also has the power over taxes and duties and imposed excises and so on. But what we've seen, Congress has slowly but surely sort of given big chunks of that power to the executive branch. And particularly in 1977, they passed a law that gave the president the power to do these kinds of things in emergency situations. And that's really the law that President Trump is relying on to do a lot of what he's doing right now. And so we have had tariffs in the past. They have been used. They have been a significant source of revenue. And I think President Trump sort of sees that as a path forward. A couple of differences, though. The federal government in the 19th century was a pretty different government than what we have now. And I'm assuming President Trump would say, yeah, that's the point. We need to have a smaller government that's more efficient and isn't really as bloated as what we have now. But the government we have now pays for things like Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare. The government in the 19th century didn't have anything resembling any of those programs. And so it's just a much different approach to government then. And so it's hard to know that tariffs would really do what he's promised that they would do, given how much really we spend now at the federal level. So tariffs have been around. It's not all that shocking, historically speaking, but it is really unusual to see what's been done here in the last couple of months. We haven't really seen a president do anything really like this outside of a war situation where presidents often use this kind of power pretty extensively.
And how is it going with other countries right now? I know that there's been a couple of pauses because other countries are coming back to say, okay, let's discuss. So what are those conversations looking like, and how is it moving forward for us as the United States?
Yeah, a lot of countries have have reached out to the administration. They claim 70 plus countries have reached out to try to negotiate over the tariff rates that have been put upon them. And so we know that some conversations are happening on all these fronts. We know that China has retaliated directly against our tariff, and so China has levied an 84% tariff now on all goods going into China. And as I said before, our tariff on China is at 125%, and so that's still there. They're retaliating. And, of course, that's a really large economy in the world, and so we have two of the major economies in the world essentially conducting a trade war right now, and there's going to be a lot of fallout surrounding that. But I think what you've seen is really a lot of global shock to some extent at what's been going on. And the EU in particular has really been, I think it's safe to say, outraged at what's going on. They feel like they should have a strong, positive relationship with the United States, and they feel like this has sort of been a betrayal of that relationship. And I think you could also say Canada and Mexico also have argued that really this is a betrayal of our historic relationship with Canada and Mexico. And, with them, we've had a free trade agreement. President Trump negotiated agreement with those two countries while he was in office last time. And basically he's tossed that aside and levied tariffs on both of those nations. And so I think that the big surprise is that this really wasn't done through negotiations ahead of time. And I suppose President Trump's point has always been, well, the tariffs are necessary in order to kickstart negotiations. But that still created quite a shock around the globe.
Do you think that it is time that there needs to be a shakeup with other countries for tariffs, for trade back and forth? Maybe not Canada and Mexico, like you stated, that have had free trade, but maybe other ones. Is it time to do that? Maybe there needs to be a change.
I have to be really clear. I mean, I have really strong biases in this area, and so I should put those on the table whenever I talk about it.
Yeah.
I grew up as a Reagan kid, and my approach to trade, and so I'm a free trade sort of person. I think free trade is better for our country. It's better for the world to have as free trade as possible. And it is true sometimes other countries haven't engaged in free trade practices with us. I think China has been the most egregious trade partner. And so I'm all for punishing China. I'm all for using this mechanism to go after how they've treated us in a host of ways. And so I have no issue with that whatsoever. But I think free trade is generally going to be better for us, better for Americans, better for our jobs, and better for us to get goods and services at low prices. And I understand we scoff at that sometimes and say, well, is the American dream really about that $10 T-shirt? Well, when a lot of the goods that you buy are a lot cheaper because of free trade, then really a lot of your wealth is tied to the ability to buy these products at very low prices. And when those prices go up, we're going to all feel the pinch of it. And so I'm okay with America being aggressive in some ways, but I think we have benefited tremendously from free trade. Since World War II, we've really been the leading economic power across the globe, and I would argue a lot of that's been because of our approach to trade. And so I think it's been good for America to be leading in this direction, and I kind of see what's happened as a step backwards. But, I'm biased, as I said, and I understand they would probably argue I'm being insensitive to people and to communities who've maybe struggled with a decline in manufacturing jobs and a decline in economic circumstances. I get that, and I understand that there are real consequences for free trade, but I think the benefits pretty far outweigh those consequences.
So kind of briefly, in the short term, what can we expect with these tariffs if they do cut? So there's going to be the 10% no matter what.
Yep.
But if the ones that have been put on pause for 90 days, those come through, what's the short term and long term things we can expect from those?
I think you're going to see inflation start to tick back up pretty significantly because, as I said, this is really going to be an increase in prices on a whole lot of things that we buy. And I think that you're probably hopefully going to see some negotiations take place, and so there's a little bit more stability in the system. In the long term, the old economic joke is in the long term we're all dead, in the sense that economists are not exactly famous for their jokes. So you do have to laugh when they come, I think. But I think the long term is really difficult here. I think President Trump has a very clear idea of what he wants to do. I think what he's tried to do has had a pretty stiff pushback. And it's really tough for me to know what the next 6 months or much less 3 or 4 years look like, because I think he has a really strong idea. He's kind of pulled off for now, but will he go back in the future? I just really don't know. I really don't. And I'm not trying to be evasive. I just think he has sent so many different signals that right now it's hard to know what the future looks like. And the business world, if it likes one thing, it likes certainty. It likes predictability. And I think this sort of uncertainty and volatility is really what's created a lot of the chaos that we're looking at right now.
We've been talking with Dr. Mark Caleb Smith of Cedarville. We have now dubbed him our political czar, keeping us informed of what's going on politically. Thank you so much for being with us this morning and for being open and honest with us. If people want to learn more about Cedarville, they have grandkids, or they're looking into school, where can they learn more?
Cedarville.edu, and you can get access to all of our programs and contact information and how to apply and financial aid and everything else. So thanks to you and thanks to all your listeners. It is always fun to talk with you all.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Smith. We'll talk to you next month.
Thanks for watching. Do you need more Ron in your life? Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new video.